Hello and welcome. You're watching World Panorama, a program that gives you insights and a perspective on all the big international stories that unfolded this week. I'm Aishwarya with you. Here is a look at the top stories in the headlines. Hong Kong leader Carrie Lam announces withdrawal of controversial extradition bill, this being one of the 4 proposed actions to break impasse. But protesters say action too little, too late. Hong Kong braces for another weekend of protests. A tumultuous week for British Prime Minister Boris Johnson. A bill to prevent a no-deal Brexit approved by the House of Lords and will pass into law. UK opposition parties also not to back Johnson's demand for a general election before the EU summit in mid-October. Two NATO soldiers among 12 killed in a Taliban car bomb explosion in a busy diplomatic area near the US Embassy in Kabul. The second major attack this week after an American envoy announces US and Taliban on principle had agreed to a peace deal. And Hurricane Dorian devastates the northern Bahamas from Sunday to Tuesday. Government warns the death toll will be staggering as aid efforts are being stepped up. As Category 2 storm, Dorian also batters the coasts of South and North Carolina in the United States. The top story this week in the latest move in pro-democracy protests that have rocked Hong Kong for the past 3 months. The region's leader, Carrie Lam, announced this week that her government will take 4 actions to initiate a dialogue to find a way out of the current impasse. She also announced the full withdrawal of the bill that would have allowed extradition to mainland China and which sparked the protests in the month of June. However, the activists say that their protests will continue until the government responds to all of their 5 core demands. And more demonstrations are planned for the coming weeks. Meanwhile, the protests have also worsened an already bad economic situation in Hong Kong.
The government will formally withdraw the bill in order to fully allay public concerns. The Secretary for Security will move a motion according to the rules of procedure when the Legislative Council resumes.
Hong Kong leader announcing the withdrawal of the controversial extradition bill that has ignited months of protests and plunged the territory into its biggest political crisis in decades. The bill would have allowed criminal suspects to be extradited to mainland China from Hong Kong. The bill had been suspended, but protesters wanted it to be withdrawn completely. Lam elaborated on 4 actions that her government will take to find a way out of the current impasse for Hong Kong.
Our responses to the 5 demands have been made with full consideration of different constraints and circumstances. I recognize that these may not be able to address all the grievances of people in society. However, should we all think deeply whether escalating violence and disturbances is the answer, or whether it is better to sit down to find a way out through dialogue?
But protesters vowed to continue demonstrating so long as the government refuses to investigate police's abuse of power. Just hours after the announcement, dozens of people shouted slogans and set up makeshift barricades outside a police station in the Mong Kong district, demanding Lam meet all of their political demands.
It's too late and too slow now. In the past 2 months, with our strike and protest, we're strongly aware the crackdown of human rights. No matter more than 1,200 activists were arrested, more than 100 of our teammates were prosecuted.
Meanwhile, with protests entering their 3rd month, many businesses in the culinary hub and retail mecca are in deep trouble. The unrest has at times crippled key infrastructure like the airport and trains. Some businesses are considering leaving the city altogether. Hong Kong's chief executive Carrie Lam saying that the protests have hurt the economy more than the 2003 SARS epidemic and the 2008 financial crisis. Tourism, which accounts for about 5% of the city's GDP, has also taken a massive hit.
I think we're beginning to see the serious impact now, and I think it will begin to show up in the GDP figures further down the line. I think we should be concerned about that.
However, protesters say that corporate chaos and an economic downturn is just what they want, saying that freedom is much more important. Hong Kong has seen months of anti-government protests. The protests were sparked by changes to the extradition law, but have since then widened to include calls for an independent inquiry into police brutality and demands for greater democracy. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
It was a bruising week for British Prime Minister Boris Johnson. The Prime Minister lost a bill designed to stop a no-deal Brexit. Johnson responded by expelling 21 of his own MPs for rebelling and saw his younger brother resign from the government. Thereafter, Johnson passionately pushed for an early election that he hopes would help him deliver Brexit by 31st of October. However, the UK opposition parties have agreed not to back this demand as well for a general election before the EU summit in mid-October. Meanwhile, the Prime Minister's decision to suspend Parliament next week ahead of a Queen's speech on 14th of October is also being challenged in the courts in England, Scotland and Northern Ireland.
After Boris Johnson's move of suspending Parliament, MPs from 7 political parties on Tuesday voted to take charge of parliamentary business. This was the first stage in their plot to stop a no-deal Brexit. Among those who hijacked the schedule were 21 members of Johnson's own Conservative Party. Lawmakers voted by 328 to 301 for the motion that seek to prevent Johnson taking Britain out of the European Union without a divorce agreement.
The ayes to the right, 328. The noes to the left, 301. So the ayes have it, the ayes have it. Unlock.
Johnson responded by expelling the 21 Conservative MPs who defied him and announced that he would immediately push for a snap election.
Mr. Speaker, it is completely impossible for government to function if the House of Commons refuses to pass anything that the government proposes. And in my view, and the view of this government, there must now be an election on Tuesday, the 15th of October.
But that idea of Johnson was also turned down. On Wednesday, Johnson failed to win the approval of enough lawmakers to go ahead with his plan to hold an early election. He needed to win the backing of at least 434 lawmakers, but only 298 voted in favour of an election, while 56 voted against. Johnson's frustration was evident.
I note that the Leader of the Opposition is once again not in his place in what I think is a slightly symbolic way. Mr. Speaker, 48 hours ago, he was leading the chants of "Stop the coup, let the people vote." Now he's saying, "Stop the election and stop the people from voting."
There was further blow to the British Prime Minister after his brother Joe Johnson quit as a minister on Thursday and announced that he was standing down as an MP, saying that he had been torn between family loyalty and the national interest.
It's been an honour to be MP for Orpington and a minister under 3 governments, but it's time to move on.
Parliament also passed a bill that requires the British Prime Minister to ask for an extension to Brexit talks if he fails to secure a deal by the end of October. The developments mean that the British government has to extend the Brexit deadline until 31st of January 2020 if there is no new deal passed by Parliament with the EU by 19th of October. Meanwhile, British lawmakers will on Monday hold another vote on a motion on whether to hold an early election. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
The House will be aware.
This week, Afghan capital Kabul was hit by 2 Taliban attacks. On Thursday, a Taliban suicide car bombing killed at least 10 Afghan civilians and 2 NATO soldiers. The blast took place in Shah Darak, a heavily fortified area and home to several important complexes, including the National Directorate of Security, the Afghan Intelligence Service and the US Embassy. And earlier on Monday, a tractor bomb was detonated at the site of the Green Village camp, killing 16 people. Now, these two attacks this week come after a preliminary US-Taliban peace deal was announced, as the group also seeks to strengthen its negotiating position with the Afghan government in the even more challenging intra-Afghan talks that are meant to follow a US-Taliban deal. The Taliban have so far rejected talking with the government, dismissing it as a US puppet.
Another attack in Afghan capital Kabul. A suicide bomber blew himself up on Thursday in the center of the Afghan capital, with the blast rattling windows and doors in an area near embassies and government buildings. 2 NATO service members, an American and a Romanian, and 10 civilians were killed. The Taliban, who are in the midst of negotiating a pact with the United States, claimed responsibility.
I was in the car alongside my son when I heard the blast. One of my sons was injured in the face. My brother, who was driving the car, also injured in the neck, and I don't know what happened to him anymore.
This is the second attack by Taliban in the Afghan capital this week. On Monday, 10 p.m. local time, a tractor bomb was detonated at the side of the southern wall of Green Village camp. The attack killed at least 16 people and wounded 119, almost all local civilians. A large crater was left in the street from the explosion. 5 attackers were killed in the Monday night attack. Around 400 foreign citizens were also rescued by the police from the well-protected complex, where a large number of foreign entities and offices are located.
I had to crawl away when attackers left as my leg was broken. The explosion was so loud that it's still ringing in my ears and I cannot hear other sounds.
The Taliban continues to defend the bombing, saying that while peace talks are going on, the attacks are to show that they are not weak. This bombing came just hours after US envoy said that he and the militant group had reached a deal in principle to end the 18-year war. And the final deal would see 5,000 US troops withdraw from 5 bases in the country within 135 days. The statement coming following the end of the 9th round of the US-Taliban talks in Qatar.
If the situation progresses based on the peace accord that we have agreed upon, then yes, within 135 days we'll pull out of 5 bases where we currently have a presence.
However, as Taliban continue to kill Afghan civilians in attacks they say are meant for foreign invaders or the Afghan government, questions are growing about the dangers of trusting the Taliban to make peace. Experts also say a full US troop withdrawal that moves too quickly could lead to a civil war, and also give other terrorist groups like Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State space to grow. The Taliban is at its strongest since the US-led invasion to topple its government after the 11th of September 2001 attacks on the US. The Taliban now control or hold sway over roughly half of Afghanistan. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
Hurricane Dorian rampaged through the Caribbean as one of the most powerful hurricanes ever recorded, killing 1 person in Puerto Rico before hovering over the Bahamas for 2 days, bringing in torrential rains and fierce winds that whipped up to 12 to 18-foot storm surges in places. Now, official death toll stands at 30 but is expected to rise further. And UN officials say that some 70,000 people are in immediate need of aid. However, bringing in aid to Grand Bahama has been hampered by severe damage to its airport. And after the Bahamas, Dorian brought storm surges along the US coasts of South Carolina and North Carolina.
It has been called the most damaging storm to hit Bahamas. Dorian killed 23 people when it hit the island nation as a highest level Category 5 storm. The death toll is expected to rise further. On 1st of September, Dorian hit the Bahamas with winds of up to 298 kilometers per hour, equaling the highest ever recorded at landfall. It battered the Abaco Islands and Grand Bahama in the north of the archipelago for 2 days. Bahamas Prime Minister Hubert Minnis called the storm one of the greatest national crises in our country's history. He expected the number of fatalities to increase.
As we moved into the Freeport area, I can report that the flooding had receded and most homes in Grand Bahama appeared to have received minor damage. Freeport infrastructurally had done well. However, from a humanitarian perspective, we must consider the psychological impact that we would experience at a later date.
Aerial video of the worst hit Abaco Islands in the northern Bahamas showed widespread devastation, with a harbour, shops and workplaces, a hospital and airport landing strips damaged or blown to pieces. With many telephones down in Abaco and Grand Bahama Islands, residents posted lists of missing loved ones on social media sites. An international relief effort is underway, with the British Royal Navy vessel providing assistance and Jamaica sending a 150-member military contingent to help secure Abaco and Grand Bahama. Volunteers also ferried supplies to the islands in small boats.
It's beyond what anyone can imagine. It is widespread, the flooding. Certainly there's still evidence of significant flooding, although in some areas the water has started to recede. But many of the homes have been totally destroyed. And so we're going to certainly need, as a government and a people, a massive rebuilding strategy or plan after all of this.
After the Bahamas, Dorian moved to the US and lashed South and North Carolina on Thursday as Category 2 storm. More than 2.2 million people in Florida, Georgia, North and South Carolina had been evacuated ahead of the landing. President Donald Trump said that the US had sent supplies to the islands, including materials that had been originally intended for any Dorian victims in Florida. Florida avoided a direct hit from Dorian. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
And here is a look at some more international news stories in the global buzz. The US imposed sanctions on Iran's civilian space agency and 2 research organizations on Tuesday, saying that they were being used to advance Tehran's ballistic missile program. The US Treasury sanctions targeted the Iran Space Agency, Iran Space Research Center, and the Astronautics Research Institute. The US will not allow Iran to use its space launch program as cover to advance its ballistic missile programs. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said this in a statement. He said that Iran's 29th of August attempt to test a space launch vehicle underscored the urgency of the threat. Robert Mugabe, the longtime leader of Zimbabwe, who was forced to resign in 2017 after a military takeover, has died. His successor, Zimbabwean President Emmerson Mnangagwa, expressed his utmost sadness, calling Mugabe Zimbabwe's founding father and an icon of liberation. Mugabe was a former guerrilla chief who took power after the end of the white minority rule in 1980. He ruled the southern African country for nearly 4 decades until he resigned in 2017. And Austrian capital Vienna has retained its ranking as the world's most livable city, according to an annual report from The Economist. Vienna once again came ahead of Melbourne, which had held the top ranking for 7 years until losing it to Vienna in 2018, according to the report by The Economist Intelligence Unit, or EIU, released on Wednesday. The top two were followed by Sydney, Osaka and Calgary. Each year, the EIU gives 140 cities scores out of 100 on a range of factors such as living standards, crime, transport infrastructure, access to education and health care, as well as political and economic stability. Amazon is still on fire. Farmers are still burning swathes of land in the Amazon rainforest, despite Brazil announcing a 60-day ban on fires for land clearing. Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro has come under fire over his fixation on developing the Brazil's economy, even at the expense of the country's protected rainforests. Bolsonaro will speak about the fires at the next UN General Assembly meeting in the month of September, a meeting that has been proposed by UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres. But Bolsonaro did not attend a meeting of the regional leaders of countries containing parts of the Amazon rainforest that was scheduled for Friday in Colombia because of an upcoming surgery.
After expressing shock and rage at the Amazon wildfires, the world has moved on to focus on other issues. But lungs of the world are still on fire. Brazilian military personnel are in Amazonian towns to help battle the wildfires. Military vehicles seen in the streets and troops in the town of Apuí, which is surrounded by Amazon forest reserves and national parks. Military helicopters have been deployed to patrol areas affected by Amazon fires.
Different kinds of personnel, vehicles and aircraft will be present here in Apuí to give continuity to the actions to increase the environmental protection in the region and create awareness campaigns in the schools.
Last week, Brazil government ordered a ban on fires for land clearing. However, despite the ban, new fires continue to crop up in the Amazon forest. The indigenous tribes that live deep within the Amazon rainforest face every day with the looming shadow of existential crisis as thousands of wildfires rage.
It is seeing the land, seeing the rainforest in the sense of profit that is the problem. The problem is still profit, wild capitalism.
Meanwhile, Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro won't be participating in the Amazon Fire Summit that was held on Friday in the Colombian city of Leticia due to health problems. Bolsonaro has drawn immense domestic and international criticism for failing to protect the region, which is a vital carbon store that slows the pace of global warming. Environmentalists blame policies enacted by him for the 80% increase in fires this year compared with the same period in 2018. They say he has encouraged farmers to clear vast swathes of the rainforest since his election.
What Brazil needs is promoting the development of sustainable projects in the Amazon, strengthen the forest code, and especially change the ignorant discourse that deforesting the Amazon brings some kind of benefits to the Brazilian population.
However, Bolsonaro has vowed to defend his Amazon policy even in a wheelchair at a United Nations General Assembly meeting on 24th of September. He also previously accused other nations of colonialism for offering $20 million to help tackle the fires. Tens of thousands of forest fires have been recorded in the Amazon during this year's dry season, the most in at least a decade. Most of the Amazon is located in Brazil, but significant parts are also located in Bolivia, Colombia and Peru, where fires have also been detected. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
And finally, do you wish to experience life on Mars? Well, a cave in northern Spain has been converted into Eris Station, which replicates the hostile Martian environment. The participants undergo 26 days of online courses and 3 days of intensive training before entering the cave for 4 days and 3 nights. And over the course of their stay, the so-called astrolanders carry out spacewalks, simulate the feeling of weightlessness, and learn how to grow food in specialized laboratories. So go to Spain and experience what a trip to the Red Planet would be like. But be ready to part with $6,600 per person for it. Till then, take a look at these visuals of other explorers getting a taste of Martian life. As I take your leave, I'll see you next week in another edition of World Panorama. Bye-bye.
Situated in the plain mountain ranges in Tamil Nadu, Kodaikanal presents a picturesque sight to behold. If this is nature's bounty here, man has gifted it a priceless heritage of science by establishing a solar observatory in Kodaikanal. This observatory was established on April 1, 1899. Equipments and manpower from then Madras Observatory were shifted here. The data collected about the various activities on the solar surface are the oldest one in India. The photographs taken from this observatory for the last 100 years are now being digitized so that the last 10 solar cycles can be studied. The flow of the gases on the solar surface, which is called Evershed effect, was first discovered in this observatory in January 1999 by John Evershed. This is a solar tunnel telescope which is fitted with a modern spectrograph at the Kodaikanal Observatory. This is fitted with 2 mirrors of 60 cm diameter and has been placed at a tower 11 meter high. These mirrors send the sunlight using another flat mirror into the 60 meter long underground horizontal tunnel where the image of the sun is projected. This observatory helps in investigating all the activities on the solar surface, including the solar flares. The magnetic field of the sun can also be measured. Besides, the information about the turbulence in the ionosphere can also be received. For the purpose of weather forecast, data relating to the temperature of the earth, atmospheric pressure, and rain is also collected at the observatory and sent to different meteorological departments in India and abroad. Functioning for the last 112 years, the Kodaikanal Solar Observatory is not just a historic heritage of the country, it is also contributing in the field of astrophysics.